Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. So the purpose of this video is just to kind of go over my experience as a whole in Paris, both the good and the bad, and also provide tips that might be beneficial for you should you visit Paris. So let's get started. So if I'm being honest, the trip started off a little bit shaky. So I landed in Paris around 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, and I took this metro train from the airport to downtown Paris. So along the train ride, at one of the stops, a group of guys get onto the train and they start very intently eyeing each and every one of us. Now it's clear that all of us were not from there. We had just landed and we had all this luggage with us, so it definitely was a very suspicious encounter, to say the least. So in this moment, I actually then sat onto my luggage, and then sure enough, a minute or two later, these group of guys then robbed the other people that had luggage with them. So definitely a very scary situation. Fortunately, everyone kind of fought back, and so nothing was actually stolen. And also, fortunately, I was the biggest guy on the train, so they didn't really mess with me whatsoever. But this was definitely a wild experience to cap off or start the trip. And I did read about pickpocketing being very common in Paris even before I left for there. However, I didn't expect to experience it to this magnitude right out of the gate. So that was definitely a wild start. But moving on. So I get to my stop in Paris and head up the stairs, and boy, I was blown away. Just all the sights and all the architecture and everything, it just blew me away the first second. And it definitely looked like I was in a new country and a whole different world and everything. So definitely was blown away the very first second I saw downtown Paris. And so first order of business though was to get checked into my Airbnb, and so I did rent a room there. And so I'll get into now kind of the things you can expect when you're staying at a place in Paris. And if I'm looking over here, I'm looking at just highlighted notes on my iPad. So when you're staying at a place in Paris, it's very common just to rent out a room in a bigger place, whether it's a house, condo, apartment. They refer to them as flats over there. And so I basically rented a room within a flat. Another thing to note is that because the buildings are so old, it's very common that they don't have AC. Another thing to note is that a lot of them don't have elevators, so you may need to carry your luggage up the stairs. The building I was staying at did have an elevator, but it was so small that it basically only fit my body and like no luggage or anything, so I just carried that up. Another thing to note is that the plugs are different into the walls. So I actually also went to Ireland after Paris, so I needed two different outlet adapters compared to what we use here in the States. So that's another thing to know if you're visiting. They're readily available off Amazon, so I would just get that ahead of time if you're going over there. And then, another thing to note is that the bathrooms are different there. So we're used to bathrooms, just everything being in one room. Well, over in Paris, the toilet is in a separate room than the shower, and like the main toilet's your sink. So that was, that took a little bit getting used to. But yeah, that was pretty much the main part in terms of like staying at a place. So let's get into now like exploring. So one of the main things I want to point out, and is a very underrated aspect of Paris, is the transit system. It is top notch. And this is coming from someone that lives in Chicago, Illinois, where our public transit system is considered really great as well. So I always grew up with a great transit system, and theirs is elite. And so with that, you don't really need to rely on Ubers or cabs or anything. and it's pretty easy to get accustomed to their transit system, which can very quickly get you from point A to point B. That'd probably be my suggested main route of transportation, and so that's a huge plus, that experience there. Let's see, what else? So when walking around just the different areas, so in going places, at least here in Chicago, it's very common for people to say, hey, how's it going? Hey, how you doing? Even if they're a complete stranger. Well, over in Paris, this isn't a good or bad thing, but just people are a little bit more stoic. So I didn't really notice that many like facial expressions, even if I did my typical greeting and so forth. So that was just something I noticed. Another thing, this is probably the single most important tip I have for anyone visiting, is even if you don't know any French or speak it or anything of that, so the one thing I would point out is at least lead with bonjour. Whether you're going to like this little convenience store or sitting down at a restaurant, lead with bonjour, even if English is all you know. Why? Well, so when I first sat down at the first cafe, and keep in mind, like I said, I got in around 9 a.m. So after I dropped off my things and got situated at the place I was staying at, I was definitely in the mood for maybe a nice breakfast and some coffee. So I sat down at the first place, but because I didn't know any French, I was just saying hello and things like that, and I didn't get service at all. I ended up sitting at that place for maybe 30, 40 minutes and just got pretty much indirectly denied service. And so I didn't really know why at the time, and was a little bit frustrated after pulling an all-nighter on a flight to get there. So I then went to another place and had the same exact experience. It wasn't until the third place I tried, shout out to Café de Rennes, that there was no issue with my English speaking, and they served me a delicious ham and cheese omelet along with some delicious coffee. Now I did come to learn that if you don't, like I mentioned, if you don't lead with bonjour, don't expect service, or if you do get service, don't expect it to be that great. But once I started leading with bonjour, and then I got great service and was able to speak English after that. So it seems just like a little detail, right? But it makes all the difference in changing your experience there, because another funny story is I went to a convenience store and I grabbed the things I wanted to buy, and then when I was at the cashier, they had a bunch of these bags there, and so I asked the lady, hey, you mind if I buy one of these bags to put all these things in? And then she just immediately yelled, get out, get out. And that was because I didn't lead with bonjour. So my first day in Paris, I actually kind of hated it, just because I couldn't get service to places I was sitting down at. And then if I went to go get some things at the convenience store to take to my flat, I was given a hard time then. So, but as I started to do some of my research on my phone and everything, just asking why are people acting this way, I quickly realized then to say bonjour. So those are just kind of some funny stories on my first day there. Let's see what else. Oh, another note is I highly recommend dressing nicer when you go to visit Paris. Everyone there dress up, even for casual situations, whether it's just to go grab a coffee or hang out at a cafe. I don't think I saw one single person in my entire time there wearing a hoodie or anything of that nature. So I was wearing pretty much button shirts like this Ambous prototype right here, polos, things of that nature. And then you just kind of fit in better into the culture and everything. And so I think, as silly as that might sound, I think that can also go a long way in just kind of blending in well to the overall experience. Let's talk more about the dining, since I kind of already dove into that with leading with bonjour. So one thing to note when you go to dine somewhere is you just go and sit down. Unlike around here in Chicago, Illinois, where you may wait for a hostess to go seat you, over there you just go sit down. Another thing is that the pace is a little bit slower there. And one thing I did really like is that the waitresses, they're not going to just constantly come up to you every few minutes, and like after they drop off your food and everything, a minute or two later come by and ask how everything is. And the reason why I like this, because so many times back home, when I'm at a restaurant, I might be in deep conversation after they dropped off the food. And then once the momentum gets going in that conversation, then it gets interrupted a couple times minutes after. And then it's just really hard to fully engage into that whole nice dining experience. So, you know, some may like it, some may hate it, but that's how it is there. And another big element is that they don't tip. And some places might even feel insulted if you tip. So that's kind of a nice thing. I guess it just kind of built into their wages. Where unlike here, workers typically get a lower wage and then rely on tips and so forth. One last thing is I noticed that the food's much cleaner in Paris than it is back home in the States. They don't really have any processed food, so even if you go to the supermarket or anything, you're not going to find frozen meals or anything like that. It's all like the food's very fresh and everything. Let's see. Public transportation's elite. Highly recommend that. You get from point A to point B so efficiently. So I'd probably rely on that more than I would Ubers or anything like that. Let's see. Another big thing, especially for people here in the States, they're on 24-hour time versus 12. So if you're making plans with people, definitely remember that they're on 24-hour time. So if you say you're gonna make plans for 1 o'clock or something like that, or 12, that can mean different things to them that might mean for you. So let's see. Another thing I noticed is that people they do a lot of walking, and also I mentioned how much cleaner the food is there and unprocessed. So people are naturally in really good shape and their eating habits are a lot healthier. However, I noticed that smoking is very common, so that's something you might just want to be aware of, that it's not uncommon for people to be smoking cigarettes wherever you go to sit down for food or coffee or so forth. It didn't really bother me too much, honestly, and I just felt like it was just part of the experience, I guess, even though I don't smoke cigarettes at all. Another thing I would suggest too is for going places like attractions, whether it's the Louvre or any other big activities, I would get tickets in advance. And in addition, I would only book one for each day. And the reason being is because I think it's very important that you allow yourself a lot of time each day to just kind of roam around and just casually walk the streets and casually sit down at a cafe here or a restaurant there and so forth. Because if you're just constantly running around, I don't feel like you then get the true Parisian experience, if you will. So, for example, I focus on like one big thing each day. So I think my day 2 I focused on the Louvre. Day 3 I focused on the Eiffel Tower. And another thing, getting back to the Louvre, is you could easily spend 5-6 hours in a sitting there. So plan accordingly, knowing that. From my personal experience, I went from hating Paris after the first day to just absolutely falling in love with it once I understood how things work there and how to better interact with the people. I saw some of the greatest architecture I've ever seen in my life. Obviously, I mentioned I went to the Louvre, so I saw some of the best art that I've ever seen in my life. And this is coming from someone who lives by the Art Institute in Chicago. Also, the food, I had some of the best food of my life there. Especially that first meal, that ham and cheese omelet was just outstanding. Probably the best omelet I ever ate. And then, as you can imagine, the coffee was absolutely delicious. As I started to get more ingrained into the culture, know how things work, I just fell absolutely in love with Paris. And the highlight of my trip was probably this night I spent, I think it was day 2. I spent some time with the locals, Parisians. I actually planned to meet up with them before I even left the States for there. And just getting to just have a night where nothing was planned, but just taking on the town with locals was just such a fulfilling and authentic Parisian experience. And then to cap off my final night in the trip was with the Eiffel Tower. And boy, just seeing that tower sparkle at night was just magical. And so, yeah, those are basically the main takeaways. And I definitely want to go back. And especially being a fashion designer, it's definitely cool being able to say now I visited the fashion capital of the world, and definitely can't wait to go back. So those are the key points, and hopefully you find it beneficial. Take care.